All right, buddy, welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking to Touré, the one named wonder, sort of like Madonna.
Yes.
You know, very powerful essence.
Yes, indeed. He has a new, really interesting podcast series. It's called Being Black, the 80s with Touré, where he takes some of the most political music from the 80s and talks about like the social and cultural forces that were going on at that time. So he talks about deindustrialization. He talks about the war on drugs and mass incarceration and what was going on with crack. He talks about, life for working class Black people in particular. So I was really excited to listen to this series because Touré and we have known each other for a long time. We're very close. And it is a really close meld of kind of his strengths, his passions, the things that he brings to the table, because he has this unique crossover of being both a political commentary and also commentator, that's the word I'm looking for, and also a cultural critic. So really cool series.
And I will bring up my controversial music opinions to his face. Not a fan of Jay-Z. Not a fan of Beyonce. I'll take Rihanna over Beyonce any day of the week. Jay-Z has an annoying sounding voice. Chris Brown is the greatest R&B singer of all time. I'll bring all this up.
Toré's going to have a lot of feelings about that.
I mean, look, I was born in 1988. I'm a child of the 90s. So to me, you're a little out of my depth once you go back to 1980s rap.
Right.
Bring up KRS-One or Run DMC, and I'm like...
Yeah, but there's also a piece of this that there's a capitalist critique as well, because at that point, rap and hip-hop hadn't gone completely mainstream.
Yeah, it was more underground.
It was more independent.
Yeah.
So there were more radical songs and lyrics that were permitted versus what comes out today.
True.
Which is all, mass market.
Yeah.
And he talks about, at that point, rap really was predominantly for the Black community. Now it's for a very mainstream audience, and that also changes who you're marketing yourself to.
Yeah. The beats back then were trash, though. I'll just say it. I mean, seriously, you're going to hold a candle to Still Dre? That beat? I mean, you play that today. A baby would be bobbing their head, it's just crazy. Crazy good beat. All right, anyway, so we'll get into that with Touré. It should be fun.
Yeah, definitely.
Before we do that, we got a bunch of stuff to dive into.
It's been a big week.
Oh, yeah. So, Trump was indicted. We talked about that the other day.
Yeah.
On Secular Talk, also on Breaking Points, you guys talked about it. Mm-hmm. And second indictment now. 7 charges he's being brought up on. And over the classified documents case in particular, that's the genesis and the heart of this. They're going after him for obstruction, all sorts of stuff. But vis-a-vis that issue. Ron DeSantis, as you predicted, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't...
Insta-cuck.
It didn't take a genius to see what he was going to do.
He woke up in the morning and chugged a giant glass of Insta-cuck juice. And so he comes out and says, the weaponization of federal law enforcement represents a mortal threat to a free society. We have for years witnessed an uneven application of the law depending upon political affiliation. I'm going to come back to that point in a second. Why so zealous in pursuing Trump, yet so passive about Hillary or Hunter? The DeSantis administration will bring accountability to the DOJ, excise political bias, and end weaponization once and for all. So, first of all, the idea of the two-tier justice system and it's based on political affiliation. To the extent we have a two-tier justice system, which we do, there's a class angle to it, and there's also a racial angle to it. The idea that it's you guys go way too hard on Republicans and way too soft on Democrats. I fundamentally do not buy that. I don't buy that for a second. The reason why if Trump handed over all the documents when he was told you got to hand over all the documents, we'd be done, because he has the privilege of being a former president, and they're going to bend over backwards to not go after him.
Yeah.
But since he went the extra mile to spit in their eye, snub his nose up at the process, hide the documents, do all sorts of sketchy stuff, that's why he is where he is. He has nobody to blame but Donald Trump.
The other thing I would say is, if you were going to make an argument about a political bias, it would definitely go in the other direction. And you can compare the law enforcement treatment of left-wing protesters versus the law enforcement treatment of right-wing protesters on January 6th. If it was Antifa that was storming into the Capitol, do you think they would have been led around on a sightseeing tour the way that some of the January 6th people were, and barricades opened for them, et cetera, et cetera?
Exactly. So he comes out and says this. Thinking, which by the political logic of it, him and his staffers are idiots. Here you have an opportunity, at the very least, to go out there and be look, I'm the no drama candidate. If you want to win, if you're serious about winning, I'm the guy. I don't have 2 indictments. I'm not going to end up in prison, so maybe I'm the guy.
I don't think you could do that politically, though. I mean, that's the problem is...
But that's the weak argument. He's not even going in that scenario.
But remember, last time when I believe it was when Mar-a-Lago was raided, DeSantis tried to just not say anything, and it became a huge political problem for him instantly. And he was super late to saying anything, and then ultimately, because there was so much pressure on him, he ends up cucking himself. Like, I don't think there's a lane to win in the Republican base by going against Donald Trump on these charges, but then that just demonstrates there is no lane really to win in the Republican primary at all.
That might be true, but if there's any hope, you have to provide a counter argument and you have to weather the initial outcry. Remember, when Trump first went after DeSantis, there was an outcry against Trump. Mm-hmm. Everybody's like, whoa, and the polls shifted in the other direction. But then Trump kept doing it and eventually was like, okay, this is what he does. And then he went back up in the polls. So for DeSantis, it's like you have to be a man. You know what I'm saying? Like you have to make some argument here. This is just total, I'm going to bend my knee and kiss your ring.
Yeah.
And that's so cuck. You're never going to win like that.
I hear you. I just think that ship has sailed.
Like, I'm saying you could be right.
Yeah.
But if you are not right, the path to victory is not Cucky McCuckington. The path to victory is like, look, I'm the serious candidate. I'm here to win. I'm the no drama guy. I wasn't indicted twice. I'm not going to end up in prison. You guys want to vote for a guy who's going to end up in prison where you're going to lose the general election? Have at it. But if you don't want to, I'm the serious one. Come to me.
Yeah, I just don't see that working.
So anyway, he cucks himself.
Yeah.
Then the Trump people still are like, screw you.
Yeah, they think they're still like, you didn't go far enough.
What did you gain? He's such a clown. So Richard Grinnell, I guess a Trump sycophant, he comes out and says, Ron DeSantis says nothing should be done about the DOJ's partisanship unless he is president. That is not what he said. That's what you read into it. Mm-hmm. He doesn't call for an end to the Trump witch hunts. There's no call to action now. This is a strategic blunder from a Tallahassee team used to dealing with an overwhelming majority of Republicans. You just want Ron DeSantis to, like, suck on his scrotum. That's what you're telling me. That's what this means.
Yeah, well, you had, he didn't go as far as, like, Vivek Ramaswamy, who was like, I would pardon Trump instantly. And, no, it's not enough to just, like, theoretically take his side in the, on the politics of this and on the, like, weaponization of the government view of all of this. It's like you have to go all the way in or it's not enough for them. It's amazing.
We've never seen anything like this. It really is something incredible where, like, twice indicted former president, clear scumbag, clear criminal, and all of the establishment voices in the party are just worshiping at his feet.
Yeah.
And this is when you and I know behind the scenes, behind closed doors, they're like, yeah, I hope that this works and we get this guy out of the way.
Yeah, they all would love for him to be gone, but nobody will actually do anything. And the ones who will say anything have no shot in hell. Like Asa Hutchinson.
Yeah. He said Trump should not, he should step down from running. Yeah.
Chris Christie has basically, demurred and said, we'll wait and see what the facts are. But he's gone aggressively after Trump on a variety of things. And I certainly could see him going after him on this. Remains to be seen what, Mike Pence is going to say. Pence was actually surprisingly pretty forceful against Trump in his launch speech, which I wasn't, frankly, expecting. But Tim Scott immediately comes down and is like...
Well, he wants to be VP, I think.
Totally on Trump's side.
He wants to be
Vivek
VP.
Ramaswamy, like I said. I think Nikki Haley also hasn't said anything, but she'll take the DeSantis route as well and say similar things, backing him up. And it's just... Look... Republicans, to the extent that they ever had an opportunity to rid themselves of Trump, I think right after January 6th was probably the best chance.
And right after the midterms, I think.
And you had Mitch McConnell sort of float like, maybe I will try to, whip Republicans in the Senate to actually convict him for these charges. He sort of put out there this trial balloon. And after they let it go for like a week or two and didn't really go out and do what it takes and try to marshal the army and have some sort of unified force, it just slid right back into, well, this was actually Antifa, or if it was our people, like they're patriots, and then they were sightseeing, right? And before you knew it, the little moment when there was maybe an opening is gone. And so, I don't know, I just feel like that ship has really sailed quite a while ago. So if you were going to come out now and be like, no, I actually think this was a crime and I actually think this is a problem, there's no way the base is going to follow you. They overwhelmingly think these are witch hunts, that the deep state is out to get him, that it's all a plot just to keep him from being president. again, that he should be president now and that it was stolen from him. I mean, that's what they think. And to the extent there were ever opportunities to disabuse people of that notion, they never actually seize on them and take them. So DeSantis and all the rest of them are just hoping that something happens that is unforeseen, that knocks him off course. But they all have to know in their heart of hearts, like, they don't actually individually have the ability to knock him out.
A point where we may disagree is that I actually think there's a chance that a deal is cut, where it's like, you stop running for president and all this goes away.
I'm very skeptical of that. And I mean, for one thing, like, that is actually what the Trump team would argue the DOJ is doing, is that this whole thing is about trying to keep him out of the White House again, and it's all actually political. So if there was to be some sort of deal like that, it would have to be floated by the Trump side. I don't think the DOJ could float something like that. And I don't know, I'm just sort of skeptical that you would mix a criminal process and a political process in that overt fashion. Now, what Ryan floated, I wonder what you think about this, when I was talking to Ryan Grimm for our Breaking Points coverage, he was like, what he thinks Biden should do is allow the process to play out. Mm-hmm. If Trump's convicted, let him serve like a week in prison and then pardon him. He felt like that's like, then there's some level of accountability, but you don't go through like the full like political rending of the country.
I think that's dumb, because then Trump will get out, continue to run for president, and maybe win.
Maybe.
I think the only way,
but that could be the deal. That's where the deal could come in, is like, I'll pardon you if you step aside.
I see what you're saying. Look, I think there's a 99% chance, let me calm down a little bit. 95% chance Trump wins the nomination. I think the most likely way he loses is if he goes to prison. That's another one where you disagree with me, where you think he could win from a prison cell.
Yeah,
That's amazing.
I also think probably the Republican primary process will be so advanced at the point that there would be any conviction.
That's a fair point. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
I hope that's not true, but I think that's a fair point. And by the way, just so everybody understands, really fascinating fact, 99.6% conviction rate when the feds go after you. 99.6.
Yeah.
So this is to your point last night when I was like, do you think they have a slam dunk case even on the original claims?
Yeah.
'Cause I know the obstruction stuff is like slam dunk. But you're like, I think even on the original they do, because they wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case. All the evidence points in that direction. 99.6% conviction rate.
Well, we already knew about this tape that theoretically existed that CNN had reported on, that was like him bragging about some like Iran war plans,
right.
Basically like how we would attack Iran.
It was worse than
that he was bragging about. And now they have the transcript. And he directly says, like, I could have declassified them when I was president, but I didn't. And
then he also says, come look at them.
Right, and
which is worse than I thought the tapes were going to be.
And he says, like, this is very secret. This is secret stuff, So it's like and the reason the declassification part is important for people who haven't followed all of the ins and outs of this is one of the arguments that they were planning to use in their defense was that he was commander-in-chief. Any documents that he took, he had already declassified, so there's no crime here. Now, that may have already been not a great defense because the particular section they're using doesn't technically require it being classified, et cetera. He didn't go through the formal process that may be necessary, et cetera, et cetera. But they were thinking that might be a defense. But if you have him on tape being like, this document right here, which is top secret, is not declassified. I could have declassified it, but I didn't. That's probably going to be a challenge for him in terms of his defense, would be my uninformed, non-lawyer view of the situation.
Grab the popcorn.
Yeah.
All right, so now I wanted to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision, which is very, very surprising to a lot of people. So this is an NPR. They say Supreme Court unexpectedly upholds provision prohibiting racial gerrymandering. The U.S. Supreme Court on Thursday stepped back from the brink of totally gutting the landmark 1965 Voting Rights Act by a 5-4 vote. A coalition of conservative and liberal justices reaffirmed the court's 1986 precedent, interpreting how legislative districts must be drawn under the landmark Voting Rights Act as amended in 1982. The court said that in Alabama, a state where there are 7 congressional seats and one in 4 voters is black, the Republican-dominated state legislature had denied African-American voters a reasonable chance to elect a second representative of their choice. The decision could reverberate across other states with reconsideration of how congressional lines are drawn in areas with significant black population. So, remember, there was a decision from a few years back.
Right.
That basically gutted the Voting Rights Act. And I remember one of the lines from one of the justices who was on the majority side was like, is it the contention of the lawyers that the South is more racist than the North? And they said it almost like, well, obviously they're not. Like, that was the implication.
Yeah.
And I remember reading that thinking, of course they are.
Yeah, I mean, we've got a long, ugly history. That's a reason why there's, additional scrutiny applied to some of these states as well.
Well, now it looks like, almost like some of them were like, okay, yeah, we did the test, and they are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It looks like they were like, oh, okay, we gave you the chance, and you didn't do the right thing.
I mean, I read it in a slightly more political way, which is that this is Chief Justice Roberts reportedly is very aware of the political standing of the court.
That it's, yeah.
And this court has took a huge hit.
Reputational hit.
After overturning Roe versus Wade. If you just look at like trust in institutions, already trust of the Supreme Court, in my opinion, justifiably so, was already quite low. And after Dobbs, it plummets even further.
Oh, yeah.
So I sort of see this
He's trying to
as
maintain the credibility of the court.
Reestablish the credibility of like, see, it's not just all partisan. Like, here we are calling balls and strikes and doing something that you liberals want as well. I mean, and it's not just liberals, like the Voting Rights Act and not discriminating on a racial basis is broadly popular with the American public. So that's more what I read into it. I read all of their decisions as just sort
political.
of like nakedly political.
They're absolutely political. Yeah. But I think some of them are genuine ideologues.
Yeah.
So let me just point out for everybody, to your point, Chief Justice John Roberts was on the majority side of this opinion. So he went more with the liberals than he did with the conservatives.
Yeah.
And Brett Kavanaugh did that.
I feel like Kavanaugh has joined with liberals on a couple of other decisions, although
I can't remember any other.
I can't pull them up at the top of my mind, but I feel like he may have taken one or two other surprising decisions.
I will say, though, remember during the abortion case, when it leaked early that they're going to slap down Roe versus Wade, there was also reporting that John Roberts, behind the scenes, was trying desperately to argue with other conservative justices, basically saying, look, we don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. We don't need to totally get rid of Roe versus Wade. We could update it in a sense. There was that case, I think it was a Casey, the case that was, they changed the standard from the trimester standard to the viability standard. Basically what Roberts was arguing was, no, keep the right to an abortion, but just tighten the standard a little bit more. So make it so it's still a right, but it's a right within the first, say, 10 weeks or whatever, or 12 weeks, as opposed to 20 weeks, which is roughly where it was with the fetal viability standard. So he was saying he understood the political implications, to your point, back then with Dobbs, where he was like, if we totally slap down Roe versus Wade, we're really skating on thin ice here. And so to your point, that could have led to him now to be like, nope, we're not going to go through this again.
Yeah.
You're going to have a court with an approval rating of like 8% in due time.
Yeah, and then you could really, actually face, okay, are we having court packing? Are we, God forbid, subject to a code of ethics like every other federal court in the country?
If it wasn't Joe Biden, these people would be afraid, right? Abraham Lincoln bucked the Supreme Court. FDR bucked the Supreme Court. A Democratic president who's worth anything is going to be like, oh, you don't like what I did here? How about you stop me with your army?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. You don't have an army. I do. And so we're going to go ahead and do this. There are times throughout history where they've ignored the court. The court has gotten it wrong a number of times. Plessy versus Ferguson, for Christ's sake.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like when they're wrong, it's not, oh, they're the supreme law of the land. That's the end of the conversation. No. It's even questionable whether or not you have the right to judicial review. Why do you get to be the ones who determine what is and isn't constitutional? The elected body of representatives who the American people picked should probably be the ones who get the final say, because at least they're representing the people.
Yeah, well, they gave themselves that power through their own, through Marbury versus Madison.
Yes, and at a certain point it becomes judicial tyranny, where they're brazenly disregarding the plain-face reading of the Constitution for their own political ends.
Yeah, I mean, we clearly have, judicial supremacy, which is not the way that this was intended. We're supposed to have 3 co-equal branches. But, so yeah, that's the vein that I read this in, is them trying to claw back some bit of credibility, because... yeah, is Joe Biden going to move against them? Very unlikely, right? This man is an institutionalist through and through, wouldn't do the 14th Amendment for the dead, whatever. There's a million examples. But Joe Biden ain't going to be president forever. That's right. I mean, he either he loses re-election, then you have a Republican, in which case you're safe for a while. But then if it's Trump, he can only be in office for 4 years, and then you've got the gates wide open. And if you really have a revolt against the court on the liberal side, that could easily become a litmus test issue in a Democratic primary. I could see that without a lot of doubt, especially if you just completely obliterated something like the Voting Rights Act on top of having already completely obliterated Roe versus Wade. So he's keenly aware that they are skating on dangerous political thin ice.
Yeah, and they got it right. Wonderful. Should have been 8-0.
Yeah.
Should have been 8-0. Wait, 9.
Yeah.
9. Sorry, I can't count.
It's okay, babe.
All right, so now, this I find very interesting. Curious what your thoughts are on it. So Gavin Newsom yesterday comes out and releases this ad, and it's basically him proposing a 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution, and it's on the issue of gun reform. Mm-hmm. So he releases this whole ad over this. He says the 28th will enshrine 4 widely supported gun safety freedoms while leaving the Second Amendment intact. Number 1, raising the minimum age to purchase a gun to 21. He makes the comparison to alcohol. Says, look, if you got to wait till then to drink, you could wait till then to buy a gun.
Yeah.
And by the way, that is a reform which would save a lot of lives according to the data. A lot of the gun killings happen with young men under the age of 21. Mm-hmm. They do the killing. Universal background checks, number 2, no loopholes. A reasonable waiting period for gun purchases, he says, number 3. And banning the civilian purchase of assault weapons, number 4.
There's a few things. First of all, I find it a little weird to enshrine the specifics in a constitutional amendment in that way. So, big picture, I do think at this point, given the way the Supreme Court has ruled, you either need a totally different Supreme Court that's going to rule, interpret the Second Amendment in a very different way if you're going to have real, any sort of reasonable gun reform, or you need some kind of a constitutional amendment. What I would be more interested in favor of is clarifying that there is, when that language of like a well-regulated militia, like the well-regulated part is important and enables states or the federal government to enact reasonable restrictions on gun ownership versus laying out these individual specific pieces, which I find that seems to me like that should be up to the voters at the state or the federal level to determine what those reasonable restrictions look like. I do actually think with regard to guns, some level of like localism does make sense to account for different uses of guns and different cultures and all of those sorts of things. And also, let's say that research comes out, a few years from now that's like, oh, actually the thing we need to do is different than these very specific 4 things that have been laid out in Gavin Newsom's amendment. And then you're kind of like SOL because you didn't write those into the Constitution when you had the chance. That's the part that seems to me a little bit strange.
So my take's a little different. First of all, I just want to point out that 3 of the 4 things he points out here are popular everywhere. The first 3 are poll well over 50% everywhere in the country. The only one where some places it's underwater is the banning of assault weapons.
Yeah, and even that is, from a national perspective, is majority support and pretty strong. But state to state, it would definitely vary.
Yeah, and certainly local area to local area.
Oh, yeah.
The more rural the area, the more they'll be like, screw you, we want to keep our own. So I don't have as much of a problem with it as you do. And even the substance of this, the laying out the specifics doesn't bother me that much either. So I'm not against this, but the thing that I keep coming back to in my own mind is, if you're going to propose another constitutional amendment, you either have to go money out of politics, clean elections to end the corruption.
Yep.
Or you have to go right to healthcare.
Yep. Which
would sort of guarantee in a certain way some form of a universal healthcare system. I would hope a single payer system, but some form of a universal healthcare system, right? Or an amendment that, and this is a personal favorite of mine, would basically lay out in plain language, every time you go vote for president, the American people get to vote directly on like 3 or 4 different specific political issues.
Yeah.
Like a certain kind of direct democracy.
Mike Gravel ideas.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if I had the choice of like 1 more amendment, I would pick one of those. If I had the choice of 3 more amendments, I would pick the 3 I just laid out before I get to this.
So this would be like maybe in the top 10 for you.
Maybe top 15. Mm-hmm. I like the policy changes. I think it's a good idea. I wouldn't go about it this way necessarily. I'm not against it. But now we come to the more important part of the conversation, in my opinion, which is, why are you doing this? What's he doing here?
Right.
And we all know what he's doing.
Yeah.
He's setting up a presidential run. 2028, is his default. But if something happens to Joe Biden, if his ass ends up in the hospital, this motherfucker's going to jump in the race in 3 seconds.
The minute that it's like politically acceptable for him, this man is running for president.
So that's really what this is about.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, like, look, I don't think this is a cheap right-wing talking point, even though I think many of the people on the right will say this. But it's like, when people think of California, what do they think of? They think of, like, rising crime, for example, homelessness, right? And it's like, it's just weird that he picks an issue that's not adjacent to the problems that are in California.
Well,
you would think he would pick an issue that's
guns are certainly adjacent to crime.
To crime, sure, that's fair. But like, universal right to housing or something.
Yeah, but that would be too based in Gavin Newsom. Although he will occasionally do things that are genuinely good, sectoral bargaining, electric vehicles,
public insulin.
Yeah, the man is pure ambition.
Absolutely.
To the extent he ever does anything that is remotely based, it just like happens to coincide with being the politically savvy thing to do. Yeah. With this, to your point about, first of all, I mean, I think it's important to have political imagination. So I hate when people shut down conversations with just like, oh, this isn't going to happen, so why are we even talking about it?
Yeah, I hate that too. Yeah.
That's really, I mean, I just think it's cheap, and we should allow ourselves to have the political imagination to, create solutions that may seem far-fetched at this point, but in an ideal world, you can push towards, or you can at least like push in that direction. So I don't want to just dismiss it as like, y'all, we're not getting a constitutional amendment, so what are we really talking about here? Even though that is the case. But I just saw some polling about how Republican positions on guns, like just extreme, like no universal background checks, no changes, no restrictions, like just wild, wild west, are wildly unpopular in general, but especially with young voters, millennials and Zoomers. Even with millennial and Zoomer Republicans, they're at odds with the Republican Party on this particular issue. And so, yeah, he sees a political opening here of something that, this threatens like the gun lobby, but he's not getting money from them anyway. So it doesn't threaten any powerful political interest that his personal political career is dependent on. He thinks it's a political winner. He wants to position himself as a national figure who can run for president whenever, Biden is gone, whatever that means, and thinks this is the way to do it. So it's not like it's really a serious proposal, I guess I would say.
Yeah, he mixes in some based social issues takes with like horrendous corporate Democrat status quo corporatism.
Yeah, I mean, they killed universal health care in California, even though voters overwhelmingly
they had like a super majority of Democrats.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's only Democrats to blame, and all the reporting indicated was Newsom behind the scenes who was pulling the levers to make sure that never even got a vote.
Stinky's knocking the thing.
Yeah, and the dog has arrived. So anyway, all right, well, that's a good time to go ahead and bring in our guest, Touré. As I said before, he has a new podcast series out called Being Black, the 80s with Touré. Let's get to it. Touré, great to see you. Welcome.
Nice to see you guys. How you doing?
Doing good.
Doing good. Since you were all dressed up and looking your best.
Well, I don't know if you run in slightly different online circles than we do, but I don't know if you're aware. It became a whole controversy who got invited to our wedding. So you're sort of outing yourself that you were there right now, which may, bring you in for criticism among people that you won't even notice are criticizing you.
I mean, look. If it's a bad thing to be at Krystal's wedding, then I'm a terrible person because I would never miss that for the world. It was a beautiful day. It was a beautiful ceremony. It's a beautiful day. I don't know what anybody is complaining about. I don't care. It was a great group of people. You guys looked amazing. Your daughter still can't find the aisle, and we're still loving that.
that was a cute moment. That was adorable.
We haven't actually told that story. So Ida, who's 6 and is our youngest, she was the flower girl, and you had to sort of like walk across the grass before you got to where the chairs were set up. And so she's walking out, and first she tries to go to like the left of where everyone's sitting.
The side of the aisle to the left of
our aisle.
Yes, and then everyone's like, no, and they point her the other way. So then
no, the other way.
She detours, but then she misses the center
middle aisle
and starts going. And then apparently also instead of doing the like delicate sprinkling of the flower, she was
throwing it. It's very aggressive.
MLB pitcher threw it right in people's faces.
And not like every couple seconds. So like I'm holding them. Throw them at you. if it was in a movie, it would be like, that is the perfect, cutest thing. Like, this 6-year-old can't figure out where to go. Like, and everyone's like, oh my God, she's so
Yeah,
cute.
she stole the show.
Yeah.
She stole the show.
Well, I obviously couldn't see. I could see her missing the aisle part, but then once she went down the aisle, I heard this big crowd reaction. I was like, I don't even know what she did now, but it must have been adorable. So
Oh, I was laughing.
Well,
anyway,
but I mean, perhaps more to the point of you guys, when the officiant asked Lowell, your son, do you take Kyle? And he was like so enthusiastic, like, yes. I'm like, it's like the ultimate like blended family moment of like the son like loves the stepfather, like, oh my God, like, yes, like, and I mean, like, I was crying inside of like, so beautiful, and I know already how much he loves you, but like, you know, it wasn't planned. You didn't tell, and he's so effusive, and you can't make. He's 10, right?
yeah, he just turned 10.
You can't make a 10-year-old do anything, and he's like, I love this man, and I take him to be my dad, and it's so beautiful. It was so beautiful.
I wasn't crying inside. I was crying outside.
Yeah, it was-
very, very visibly the whole time.
That was really sweet from him.
But I will say the hardest one to crack, the one that I was like, I knew kind of roughly the reaction I'd get from Ida and Lowell.
Yeah.
But it was actually the older one,
Ella.
Yeah. That when she said yes, that was touching. Because you
Yeah.
never know, because she's old enough where she could be like, fuck this dude. Like, you're not my dad, bitch. Get away from me. But she was very loving.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. Well, and Touré has known these kids since they were itty bitty.
Yeah.
I mean, you've known Lowell literally since he was born, and you know, very close with him. And anyway, we were glad that you were there, and to make the transition, and glad to get to talk to you today about your new project. Which first, you know, I set up for people a little bit, but just share with people the genesis of the idea, how you came to it, and what the sort of creative process was for developing the series.
I've been thinking about this concept for years and trying to figure out how to pull it together. And the Griot was so gracious in giving me like all the room and like, what do you want to do? I want to do a podcast about blah, blah, blah. And they were like, great, go do it. And like, no notes, like make it happen. And they really creatively let me do like whatever I wanted to do. And what I believe is that great music speaks to the time that it comes from. And especially like great black music is inherently political. And you don't need to be doing an overtly political song or an overtly protest song, but just like almost every black song is inherently political in some way. And I wanted to explore that, and how could we talk about the big issues that are inside of some of the big songs. And like, you know, like I saw like Tracy Chapman's song Fast Car is not a protest song, but it is, right? She's talking about poverty and the difficulty of living in poverty and the dream of escaping poverty. And black poverty rises in the 80s. Well, the black middle class also rises in the 80s and expands but you know, it gave me this opportunity to, okay, let's talk about the expansion of poverty, but also the imperative of self-esteem, because the core moment of the song is she's like, you know, we could escape, and I could feel like, or dreaming of escaping, I could feel like I am someone, I could be someone, right? That's like the zenith moment of the song. And that's what Jesse Jackson was talking about in his presidential campaigns in the 80s. I am somebody. He was really presenting himself as a moral leader more than even a policy leader. You know, so like that, because so many people responded to the desire for self-esteem, you know, and of course the song basically premieres to the world at a global birthday concert for Nelson Mandela, which happens to have 600 million people watching, because the world is Afrocentric at that point. And people are thinking Africa's problems are America's problems. And we're not free until they're free. So 600 million people are watching when she goes out and performs Fast Car. And she had been out for months. Nobody cared. And suddenly everybody cared. And she became a global superstar off of one performance. Because that song is so incendiary, and it's so beautiful, and it's so amazing. But the thing I didn't realize until I fully dug into her history is she would never have been there without affirmative action. That she is one of those kids who grew up in poverty in Cleveland, single mother, single parent, and somebody was like, you could go to one of these schools in New England, and she didn't even know what that was. Her mother didn't even know that whole circuit existed of these private boarding schools that are kind of a fast track to the Ivy League. And she gets in and gets a scholarship to the Wooster School, and in Connecticut, and that completely transforms her life. So the story of Tracy Chapman and Fast Car allows me to dive into all these important issues for Black people in the 80s in terms of the rise of poverty, the rise of Afrocentrism, the value of affirmative action. And so it allows me to tell stories, and we try to do that through NWA talking about being a drug dealer, Diana Ross talking sort of about being gay. That's a whole other story, because she did not realize she was making a gay icon, an
Accidentally
iconic
making a gay anthem.
which she's doing, I'm Coming Out. The producer did not tell her that was what they were talking about. He made her think they were talking about something else. She found out later the hard way. But that's a different story that we can get into. But just finding ways to talk about political issues in the world through important songs that are enduring.
So why do you think, because this is something I've been thinking about knowing we had this interview, why do you think, or do you even agree with this premise, that I feel like today, and even through my whole life, I was born in 1988, so I'm more of a child of the 90s than I am of the 80s, but it certainly feels like...
Hold on. What?
Yeah.
You were born in 1988?
That's
I
right.
was graduating from high school. Oh my God. Okay.
And you know what, Touré? I also feel old right now, so you got to feel really old, because I wake up stiff in the morning. Like, I'm 35. It feels like I'm 80. But anyway, so
Okay. Continuing.
The music that I was sort of raised with, and the music that I love, and I think about the message from that kind of music, and so I'm a big R&B fan. Is probably my number one genre that I love, and that's mostly singing about love. But if you look at the rap that I listened to growing up, whether it's Jay-Z or Fabulous, or I was a big fan of Southern rap. I love like Cash Money Millionaires and Big Timers, and that's all almost like rampant materialism, capitalism, debauchery type stuff. So I guess my question is, why, when I think of political music in today's day and age, I think of that like goofball Forgiato Blow, who's the Trump rapper who did like our kids are Target's targeting our kids, this stupid terrible rap song. And then when I think of the music I like, it's mostly sort of non-political or apolitical. The substantive kind is about love. Then you have the non-substantive kind, which is about whatever, money, women, debauchery, hedonism, etc. What happened to music where there was seemingly like a golden era in the 1980s, which spoke to a more real, deep, substantive human experience, versus now it seems very, very just like consumer driven. The focus is more on the beat sounding good, not necessarily the substance of the lyrics. What happened, or do you disagree with my premise? I think actually still is substantive.
No, it's a great question. I mean, part of what happened is that in the 80s, hip hop was relatively underground. It was controlled by smaller labels that were not connected to larger labels. So Def Jam was its own thing. Raucous, loud. Tommy Boy was a huge player. These were standalone companies. So Russell or Monica or Andre Harrell at Uptown or Puffy at Bad Boy, they were empowered to make their own decisions. So they didn't have somebody bigger than them at the parent company saying, we can't do such and such. As you move into the 90s, the smaller hip-hop gets bigger. The smaller labels are getting bought up by larger conglomerates. In the 2000s, you see even more of a consolidation of like a few companies own all the record labels. Many of those companies that own the record labels are in many other businesses, don't really care about the creative industry, want to see a profit on the quarterly balance sheet. So what happened before, when it was like, hey, LL Cool J is not, ready to release this album. He needs Public Enemy needs another 3 months to make sure that 6 months to figure this album out. Okay, go ahead. Like, come back when you're ready. Not when, the German companies happen to own a lot. There was a big French company, but there were a lot of German companies that own. And people would talk about, like, we have to make the quarterly. You can't be late, because if you're late, then our quarterly numbers are going to get fucked up, right? And they don't understand that. So some of that attention to detail, some of that attention to creativity was lost. And obviously, when you have a bigger corporation over you, some of the more aggressive political things can't be said because the label is telling you can't say that. When Ice-T was doing Cop Killer, right, his label is owned by Time Warner, which is also lobbying politicians to say, can we put down fiber optic cable in Montana and Alaska, whatever it may be. And so when you have C. Dolores Tucker holding congressional hearings, calling out different people, are like, what? I can't deal with this. I can't deal with. The executives are like, I don't need the stress. Tell Ice-T to shut up. We're trying to make $1 billion over here in Alaska. So whereas in the '80s you didn't have that because hip hop was smaller. Like, if the market cap in hip hop, let's say, was $1 million in the '80s, it was $100 million in the '90s, it was $1 billion in the double O's. Major corporations are like, we're not messing this up so that you can say blah blah blah. So it definitely the less politicization. I think also you saw the other big thing is that in the '80s, the prime consumer of hip hop was the urban black male, right? And the urban black woman as well, but I think overwhelmingly it was the urban black male who wanted to hear political things. He wanted to hear about, the cops is fucked up, Reagan is fucked up, whatever. In the '90s, it shifts to the suburban white teenager, right? And I think in the '80s, it was probably more around a 24, 25-year-old consumer that was dominant. In the '90s and the double O's, it becomes a 17, 18, 16-year-old white suburban consumer who is dominant. So obviously, the sorts of things that are going to be said, the sorts of artists who are going to be prized, all that is going to change. And the incentive changes, right? In the '80s, Public Enemy's doing great. Other groups want to follow in their footsteps. In the '90s and the double O's, you're not seeing that. So somebody like Drake, who's is the North Star as far as how do we become popular today? It's a pop sound, right? It's not very regional. It's not very political. Anybody can listen to it. It's Drake isn't even really making you feel guilty as a white person, which Public Enemy did probably. So that's the model today. So I mean the ownership and the audience changed that led to the whole world changing.
I think you talk explicitly in one of the episodes about how, a song like Fuck the Police wouldn't happen under the modern day because of some of those constraints.
Weren't there lawsuits over stuff like that? I feel like there were a bunch of lawsuits in the '70s or '80s about rap music, right?
Well, there was
Al Gore's wife,
there was political issues in the '80s where basically the establishment, the older generation of black boomers were like, what is this wild music? This is going to ruin the children.
Moral panic.
Moral panic. But what Krystal's talking about, what we talked about in one of the episodes, that Eazy-E was a drug dealer before he was a rapper. So he was independently wealthy. So when he starts his record label, he's funding it. He doesn't have other people, white people, telling him you can and can't say such and such. So that was part of why NWA was able to have the freedom to say whatever they want and stand out as far as hip hop rappers will say crazy things NWA stood out even in that environment because Eazy was his own boss, right?
Right.
When you and the DOC, who was part of NWA, talks about it like when he went to get his own record deal at a traditional label where there is, white people above him, and he's like, I did a song in the mold of NWA, and they were like, we can't have that. You got to take that off, right? So that who's the boss is absolutely a critical part of the conversation.
Well, and that story came out of you did 2 episodes that were on the crack epidemic. And so
Yeah.
you sort of tackled it from a bunch of different perspectives. You talk about De La Soul being one of the first representations of not just like the black urban class or working class, but of the black middle class, and trying to prove like a credibility, a sort of street credibility by talking about his brother who is struggling with addiction. You talk about the sort of glamorization of dealers. You talk about the way that drug money, would devastate these communities, and then it also would shape what businesses get funded, who's going to actually make it, who's going to be successful, and even the type of music that gets promoted. So talk about that was such a horror of the time and a real touchstone of how you focused your energy across the podcast series. Talk about your approach there and some of the songs you chose to highlight.
Well, yeah, I mean, crack had a massive impact on the black community, on America, but on the black community in particular. So we definitely wanted to give crack a lot of time. I mean, I don't think you can understand the 80s without understanding the impact that crack had, which was about families, it was about physical health and mental health, it was about, the justice system. So De La Soul makes an incredible song, My Brother's a Basshead, which gets us into talking about the impact of crack on families. And, part of what I do in the show is there's a main song that is the focus of the episode, but we also bring in another song as a way of saying, like, when you see these two songs compared to each other, you can kind of understand the similarities and the differences more. And Public Enemy is also a family dealing with a crackhead being in their midst in the family in a different way, right? And they talk about the crack epidemic in a very serious way as opposed to De La Soul, which is a little bit more family, lighthearted, struggling emotionally, but it's still kind of light. To Public Enemy, saying like, this is a horrible scourge of the community and it needs to stop. However, there is a drug addict in your group. While you are lecturing the rest of us about doing crack, you are not ministering to Flavor Flav, who is your brother, who is also a crack addict. And I asked Hank Shockley, who was their producer, who was part of the group, did you know that Flavor Flav was a crack addict? And he goes, yes and no. I'm like, what? How can it be yes and no? Like, either he is or he isn't. Like, you're not doing a little crack. Nobody was microdosing on crack. So I don't understand how he said yes and no. But it's kind of like I took that really as like, we knew, but we didn't want to admit it to ourselves.
Well, and his answer was interesting because you offered that up of like, so it was basically like you knew, but you were kind of in denial. And he was like, let's take it even a step further than that, which is that we knew, but we didn't want that to limit him. We didn't want that to limit us. So they almost like pretended as if that wasn't the case, as like, this isn't everything that you are. And so we're just going to sort of disregard this piece for now and operate as if we were on the other side of this struggle.
I mean, there's this persistent view in music. Maybe people don't hold this anymore, but for a long time, there was a sense of like the drug helps you. And I know a lot of jazz players used heroin because Charlie Parker used it. And like, if he did it, like whatever I could do to be like him. And I remember Axl Rose telling Rolling Stone that he felt like once he started going to therapy, he wasn't as good a musician because he wasn't as crazy. And I could see in the back of their minds be like, he's wild and he's a crack addict and that they are probably symbiotic. And if we get him off of the crack, he may not be the same. So, But I mean, also people understood even then you can't save an addict who doesn't want to be saved, and
Yeah.
Flavor Flav definitely did not want to be saved at that point. Um, but the De La Soul song, Paz de News, is just telling his truth. And he came into the studio knowing what he wanted to do. He was very hurt and upset about his brother's situation, and he's just pouring out his real life story in that song. And the ending is not real in the song. The character moves to New York and becomes perhaps an even worse addict. In real life, the brother got help and got clean, as far as we know. But it was a real life story, and it gave us a way of talking about the difficulty for families when somebody, because it wasn't just the crack addict who was being hurt, it was everybody who relied on that person in their family was also hurt. So I mean, this had a massive impact on everybody.
Where are the people that you cover in the series? Where are these groups now, or these individuals?
That's a great question. I mean, we, nobody's career lasts forever. Talib Kweli once said to me, nobody retires from the music business, the audience retires you. And there's no old wing of the music business. There is, in the sense that you can become a legacy act where you're basically like a jukebox, and Madonna, Janet Jackson, the Rolling Stones can go on tour, do the old songs again, and people will go to those concerts 100%.
Sagar just went to a Blink 182
Oh my
concert.
God.
That was the first big millennial nostalgia tour.
Let me tell you, he's whiter than me. He's way whiter than I am.
But they're not going to be able to release a new album. They might find a way to do a cover album or to do, we remixed our old stuff, but they're not going to do a new album. They're a legacy act. They're not a current act. So, I mean, if you were hot in the 80s, you're a legacy act now. I saw Stevie Wonder a couple of years ago when he was doing I'm going to do the whole album from front to back tour, right? Which was exciting, but they're doing a 40-year-old album. I wanted to see that, but so I mean, the De La Soul, obviously they just lost a member of the group, but they're still out and about trying to, tour, I guess. I mean, I don't know when you'll see them tour, but I'm sure they're probably thinking about it if they can. Pushing their music into different movies and television shows and things like that. Stevie Wonder, he's quite old. I think he still has the ability to tour, but he's been around for a while.
It's sort of interesting watching the life cycle of artists, because you do feel like, or at least I get the sense that some people, they can kind of maintain at a high level, not just in terms of sales, but also in terms of relevance, creativity and relevance. And then others, like you say, they just sort of hit a peak decline and then they become a legacy act. And I would love to almost hear from them why they think that is, how does that happen, and if they feel like it's possible to recapture that magic. Because to your point, it's almost like when you're speaking to real struggles and real issues, and that's sort of like your creative outlet, and then mix in maybe a little bit of substances here and there, it's almost like a perfect recipe to then get something beautiful, but that's only a flash in the pan. It's only a brief moment in time.
The dominant music consumer is 15 to 25 years old, and probably starting to thin out in the 20s, in the 25, 24, right? And you remember when we were that age, the groups that you really loved was part of your identity, right? And I am in a tribe of people who like the Grateful Dead or Jay-Z or Parliament Funkadelic, whoever it is. And after you're 25, you don't really relate to music like that. You don't go to clubs less and less. Your tribe becomes your family, right? Your wife, husband, kids, whatever. You're identified by this is my wife, this is my husband, etc., rather than I love this group, right? And you have less time to be aware of new artists. Somebody asked me that question many years ago. I remember the guy. We were about 40, me and this guy, and we both loved Anita Baker. And he's like, "How come they don't make music for us?" And I was like, "You love Anita Baker, right? Yeah. You know she dropped a new album 3 months ago? No. Well, that's why. Because you are not in the clubs. You don't watch MTV. You don't, you don't read Rolling Stone. How would they even let you know? Like they were trying to tell you,
That's
you
fact.
like Anita Baker. We have a new Anita Baker album. He's not aware because he's working, taking care of his kids, soccer practice, like doing the things that a 40-year-old man is supposed to do, which generally does now, if you're 15 or 20, you're in the clubs, LCD Sound System has a new album coming out on Wednesday night, whatever the case, like it's very, very hard to reach people after, so when you grow up as an artist, like you're older, you're doing the same things. You are also a parent and you are not going to the clubs the same and you're not in touch with the culture. You're not in touch with when you're 35, it's hard to talk to a 20-year-old if you're not a teacher or related to them. Like, what do we have to talk about? And to think I have to communicate to a million 20-year-olds for this song to have any relevance or meaning. Not just one, but 1 million or 2 million. It's very, very, very difficult. And I have to do that competing against a 20-year-old who is in the world and knows exactly what 20-year-olds in 2023 are going through.
And is hungry and struggling and still on the way up. I mean, that's to me seems like a part of it too. If you're that 35-year-old artist who's been successful and now you've like made it and you're financially comfortable and you're raising your kids and doing that whole thing, there's also like you can lose that edge that created the energy and the emotion and the rawness that's in the music that you make when you're younger.
You can. I mean, you got to be a real genius to keep churning them out in your 40s, in your 50s, and like Paul Simon and Stevie Wonder, and maybe Bono and U2 and them. But it's hard. It's hard. John Mayer said something to me once that before you're 40 as an artist, you should spend not all, but most of your time in the studio because that's where you might make a hit. But after you're 40, you should spend most of your time touring because you're probably not going to make a hit. So you should be out flogging the hits you already have, right?
Very
And the audience wants to, right? And the audience wants to come see them. So I mean, it's just I think that maybe some of them lose some of the hunger that they had when they were rising. But I think it's really just like the challenge of relating to children when you are no longer a child, right? It's just becomes harder and harder to make relevant statements for them. And also, when you're 15 to 25, you want your own thing. You don't want your parents' thing, right? So the artists must change. The music must change because you need something. You may not even want your older brother or sister's thing, right?
Although I want to push back on that a little bit because so a lot of my musical awareness at this point comes from having a 15-year-old daughter. This is like my direct, mainlining of the culture at this point. And I can't tell you how many times, like, whatever new song comes out and it has a beat from the 90s or the 2000s.
They recycle what they know works. They'll take the best beats, tweak it, and then have the new person on top of it.
And I understand why. I mean, it's the same reason that you were talking about, like, now that this is all mass marketed, there's a totally different model. It seems like the same exact reason. It's like, oh, well, we tested this in the lab. So the capitalists are thinking, like, we know this is going to work because it worked before. So we're just going to take this thing, plug it in, and let it rip. So I mean, do you also feel like there's a dearth of creativity in the industry now, or do you not see that?
I never wanted to dismiss the entire generation and say back in my day was better. I do think that hip hop has, in general, has had better days creatively, but I never wanted to be the guy like, oh my God, like this music today sucks. I'm not aware of all of the music. I am aware of that thing you're talking about where they can take the important parts of a song, that a melody, whatever, that succeeded before, and redo it. I mean, I think there's some melodies that are timeless that will grab you, but it's presented in a whole new thing, right? Like, it's not the same song. To us, it's like, it's pretty much the same song, but it has changed sufficiently to where the 20-year-old or the 15-year-old does not need to be aware that this was
Sure.
a hit
And
before.
also,
Yeah,
our
sure.
stuff was taken from beats from the 70s,
Right,
right?
yeah,
Like, there
like-
were 60s or 70s, and then you hear a song in the 90s, a good R&B song, and you're like, oh, I love this. But that beat was also recycled. Remember we went down the rabbit hole on that with certain songs?
Oh yeah, for
Sure.
sure. For sure.
Sure.
But I guess I feel like I should actually be more lost and uncomfortable with the music of today than I actually am, because when I hear it, it sounds like a lot of the songs sound so familiar, and like it's not I just took, a hook, or I took a beat and made a whole different thing of it. It's like too similar to the original to separate from what the original was.
See, I think part of it is that as Gen Xers, and I'm speaking about me and Krystal now.
I'm a millennial, thank you very much.
She makes the cut.
You're not. We've discussed this.
I'm an old millennial, Touré.
As a
not.
representative
You wanna
of
be-
Team Millennial, we are drafting Krystal.
You're at the end of Gen X. But Gen X experienced our boomer parents looking down on our culture. And I think we said, I don't want to do that. When I'm a parent, I will be embracing. I don't want to be get off my lawn person. And we wanted to be embracing of the next generation. So, we want to wrap our arms around the Zoomers and be like, whatever you got, we love you. We accept you, right? We're not going to do what our parents did. So we're trying to do that. And I think in a lot of ways, we're succeeding at that. I think a lot of us want to be our kids' friends more than our parents. A lot of our parents, there was a clear hierarchy. I'm sure a lot of Gen Xers are, I am not your friend, right? Like, and we are on different levels. And we took to parenting differently, right? And so I think we're trying to be more open and accepting of what the next generation wants. That doesn't mean that we understand everything that they want and they're talking about, but we want to be understanding.
Yeah, I still can't. I'm not a Drake fan. I can't do it. I can't do
feel
it.
you.
I can't do it.
I like a bunch of his songs. I get some of the sonic appeal and the poppiness and the catchiness of his music and his voice. Where I get upset is when the millennials start saying, this is the greatest or one of the greatest rappers of all time. I'm like, he's not even a good rapper. Right?
Oh
he's
my God.
not even good. So, and they'll point to sales numbers, which is very problematic because the
Yeah.
rap community is finite. It's only so big. I think, I haven't looked at this in a while, but I think we could make an album double platinum, 2 million, maybe 3 million, maybe. But when you get to Drake numbers, 6, 7, 8 million, which he's done several times, there's a lot of suburban non-hip hop fans who are
Yep.
buying the records.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people who have Drake and Taylor and Katy and aren't really listening to other rappers. That's fine. But when you point to sales as the reason why Drake is one of the greatest, I'm saying you're giving a vote on who's the greatest rapper to a lot of people who don't
know any
care
other
about
rappers.
hip hop.
Right.
That's not. Why are you voting on this at all? You don't get to vote on this. This is what hip hop fans are voting on, and hip
So
hop
how would
fans are
you
looking
how would you do the metrics, Touré? And who
Of-
would be on
of-
your list?
of my top rappers of all time. You asking who or the metrics?
Both.
For the metrics, I think more about areas of performance. So I think about flow, first of all. I think about lyrics and diction. What words are you using? What metaphors are you using? What are you talking about? Are you making a point? Like, is there a point
Hmm.
to your music? Not
Mm.
just, I'm just spitting, but like, are you saying something to where somebody else could not do that? I listened to an AI version of Biggie and Pac
Hmm.
doing Jay-Z and Kanye's was it Otis? I think it was Otis. And it's like, well, Biggie might have done Jay-Z's verse, but there's no way that Pac would do Kanye's verse. Because we know Pac, what he talks about and what Kanye talks about, right? So there's a brand that you talk about in other areas as a brand expectation. Are you creating that? Um, there's some other, the quality of your voice.
Mm-hmm.
Some people could just read the phone book and you'd be enthralled. And
Mm-hmm.
some people
Mm-hmm.
don't have that. So they've got to say great things. That's a big part of it for me. Some people talk about influence, but that gets very subjective, I find. You know, but I also think about how many times have you made a landmark song or album? But that too is complicated because in the 80s, they weren't really able or thinking about it as a career, and very few people made three, four great albums because it wasn't as careerist as it became in the 90s. So,
Mm-hmm.
Jay Z and Nas have made tons of albums, they made tons of great albums and tons of great singles. I don't want to dismiss Rakim because he's really just two albums because they weren't, and he had a relatively long career for the 80s, for an 80s rapper. But I think about Jay Z and Nas, I think about Rakim because the voice is so incredible, the flow is so incredible, there's so many stylistic innovations. He's the one who's creating and popularizing internal rhymes. Um, that people had not been doing, and polysyllabic rhymes when people have been doing monosyllabic rhymes, which become so incredible. I think a lot about Andre 3000 and Kendrick Lamar as sort of a top five. I think Lil Wayne is incredible, and he's up there. Biggie has one of the most incredible careers. There's probably a couple more if I really started to think, but I mean, those are kind of the main guys that I think about a lot.
I'll give you five I love: Nas, Tupac, Jadakiss, Lil Wayne, and I'm a big Fabulous fan. That's in no particular order, by the way. I'm not saying it's like Nas
That's
one,
your
Jadakiss
ranking.
two. No, I'm just giving five off the top of my head that I really, really
Yeah,
love. But I'm also a big fan of Southern rap, and I
yeah.
know that people don't tend to put the Southern rappers in
Well,
the
you had
top five.
Andre 3000. He's Georgia,
Well, yeah,
right?
I named two of them in Andre and Lil Wayne. There was a time when it was acceptable, socially acceptable, to look down on Southern hip hop, and then there was a time when like that's ridiculous because we have Ti,
The beats,
we have
man. The beats are
Lil
great.
Wayne. When Andre 3000 came out, when Goody Mob came out, it's like there's a lot of incredible. And Rick Ross is not necessarily like what he's an interesting example because he doesn't really flow that well, which is my number one criteria. That is the number one thing for me in terms of rating you as an MC, your relationship to the beat. Can you become another drum line within the track and make that really an interesting musical part of the song? And quite often, the first time I listen to a song, I can't really follow all the lyrics, but if
Of course.
I can follow the flow, and if the flow is interesting, then I want to keep following you. Rick Ross is not great on flow, but he does say some interesting things, and he does have a great voice, and he is a great uh, beat picker. The sort of beats that he chooses. So he sort of is an interesting example of a great Southern rapper, even though he's missing some parts of the puzzle. Um,
Makes up for it in other ways.
he
So
makes it further. Tupac is an interesting one because I feel like a lot of people want to argue greatest of all time, one of the greatest of all time. I feel like he's really not very. I don't think he's a great rapper, really, at all.
Blasphemy. Blasphemy.
The flow is not very good. What he's talking about is quite often, he's fairly monosyllabic, and he's fairly simplistic a lot of the time in what he's talking about. He has some deep songs, but a lot of time I get around just as much as he is Brenda's Got a Baby.
I always felt that way about Biggie. I was never a big Biggie fan, and I know that makes me a traitor to the East Coast in a sense, even though I'm from New York. But for whatever reason, he never caught my ear. Pac, I agree, he's got like a unique style. It's very punchy, but I feel like it worked.
I feel like if we could erase from people's memory all the stuff Pac did outside of the studio, shooting a cop, beating up the Hughes brothers, all the shit, the Black Panther, it was like a story a week about Pac for a while of like
his old interviews are crazy, and you can see him on YouTube. The stuff he would say.
God.
Yeah.
I think if we could erase that from people's minds and stop thinking about him as this Black Jesus savior figure, they would stop talking about him as a top 10 MC. I think with Big, especially with the second album, the flow, the precision with the words and the diction, the way that he talks about, he's one of the great storytellers in hip hop history, with like cinematic detail to where you can see the situation and what's happening that he's describing. It's something I didn't realize. There was a documentary about him where they talked about there was an older jazz drummer who lived around his way, who he talked to several times about music, and they pointed out the jazz drummer-esque nature of the way he approached rhythm sometimes. And I was like, oh my God. Like when I saw that and they show it, and I'm like, I had not put that together. Especially with the second album, Life After Death. I think he's it's extraordinary.
Yeah. I think Jay-Z's overrated. I know that's blasphemy too.
That is absolute blasphemy, Kyle.
Yeah.
Krystal, I can't even talk to your man right now.
Listen, I'll give you this. Here's my theory on
What
Jay-Z.
are you talking about?
First of all, I'm not even going to get into the politics because that's a layup for me in this argument. I feel like a black Republican, money I got coming in, massive capitalist.
Well, hold on, wait.
I'll put that aside.
Hold on. He is not a black Republican, right? I mean, in that line, he says, I feel like a rich man. He is absolutely progressive. He has been that lefty who has times been traitorous to the movement, right? In terms of he basically said we could stop listening to Colin Kaepernick now, right? Because I got this, and he had nothing, right? He was just basically telling us stop listening to him, right? The NFL gave me a bunch. So the politics, but I don't count the politics. That's not.
No, fair. I agree with you on that, but I'll just say this. The song Can I Get A, when that song is straight fire. So he came out on the highest note imaginable, and then ever since then, every time I hear a Jay-Z song, I'm like,
Every Jay-Z song? You don't like any Jay-Z song?
I mean, I'll keep him on the radio if I hear
really
it.
like his voice too,
I don't
right?
like his voice. His voice annoys the shit out of me. It's like, you don't sound good. It doesn't sound good to me. Listen, I'll give all my blasphemous opinions today if you really want to.
What is happening? It's fine.
Ready for this? Number one R&B artist all time, Chris Brown. And we're gonna leave aside everything he did in his personal life. We're just gonna say musically, number one all time.
What are you talking about? Number one R&B artist?
I mean, we could talk Keith Sweat, go back to I can give you different from different eras.
James Brown and Michael Jackson and George Clinton and Janet Jackson made R&B.
So that leads to a good question that I wanted to ask you about, which is, what's your view on separating the art from the artist? Because I'm sort of a fundamentalist on this question, and I'm big on the team of I'll still listen to Michael Jackson, I'll still listen to Chris Brown. I'm easily able to separate the art from the artist. I don't feel like that reflects bad on somebody morally or ethically. But there's some people who really disagree with that, and they say no, if you're if you're sitting there listening to Michael Jackson, you're basically like co-signing pedophilia in a sense or whatever. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you've talked some about this with regard to Kanye.
I mean, yeah. I mean, look, it's a complicated issue in which a lot of us are forced to be hypocrites, right? Roxane Gay has a great little bit about this in Bad Feminist, where she trashes R. Kelly, for obvious reasons, but then she's like, but there's that rhythm goes to a lizard brain place in the mind where, when the Ignition remix beat comes on, she can't help dancing. And I'm like, I get you. I am there.
That's facts.
Fuck R. Kelly all day, but that Ignition beat is so dope. I can't front.
Why do you have like 30 bangers? He had like 30 bangers.
Yeah.
R. Kelly. Yeah. You could play any random R. Kelly song, I'm always like, oh, this is a good one.
I can't separate it when people are doing like truly horrendous things. I can't hear Michael Jackson and forget the documentary, right? Especially when you realize that the entire life was constructed to lure in children. Mm-hmm. So they're not two separate things. It's not like I was making music and then as a hobby, I was chasing boys. Like Neverland, the entire childlike nature of his persona was all to disarm people so that he could be alone with their kids, so that he could, it's ridiculous. I don't understand people who can, listen to Michael Jackson or go to that play or I'm like, that's insane. I loved the music, and then I saw the thing, and I was a documentary, and I'm like, I can't forget.
But I gotta push back on that.
I was just gonna lay out what my thoughts are, which is that I don't have like a moral judgment of a person who would still listen to Michael Jackson and like get something personally out of it and like feel a certain way about it, like the Ignition remix example from Roxane Gay. But I do think what you're speaking to, Touré, is that when you know the backstory of these songs, it can actually change the experience of the art itself. And,
Sure.
I do feel that way somewhat about Kanye. I think I feel that way somewhat about R. Kelly. I feel that way somewhat about Michael Jackson, where it's not that I think there's anything morally wrong with still enjoying the art if it speaks to you, if it does something to you. Because I do think once it's out of the artist's hands, like it's up to human beings how they experience it. But for me, the art itself can be altered by the knowledge of the context in which the songs were made.
So let me push back on that.
If you've done something horrendous, I don't listen to Kanye at this point because of the anti-Semitism things. I don't listen to Michael Jackson because of the pedophilia. I'm trying to think of other major cutout.
This can be taken to an extreme, though, if you think about it. Like,
I wouldn't I wouldn't see a Woody Allen movie at this point, and I was a big Woody Allen cinematic fan for a while. But I would listen to Marvin Gaye.
Yeah,
and he was dating a 17-year-old when he was 34, right? I would listen to the Rolling Stones, right? They did the same thing. I would listen to James Brown, So, this line of thinking, let's call it cancel culture, because I think this is what this is about. It's hard to escape becoming a hypocrite, right? Eventually, right? Otherwise, you have, you're cutting out so many people. But I guess I'm further over than you, Krystal, because I'm looking at other people like Kyle who are like, I still like Michael Jackson. I still wear Kanye shoes or whatever. I'm like, you are okaying what they said and did.
But see, that's where I have a problem though, because to me that just feels like a flat out straw man. Because if you talk to these people, there's not a single person who will say, yeah, I support Michael Jackson doing pedophilia. They'll just be like, yo, I like the song Thriller. Like, I listen to it from time to time. Like, that's the point. So just to give a counter argument here, I went to school with, and my buddy Corin, my best friend, we went to school with Ray Rice, the NFL player. He of course, there was a massive outcry because he was caught on a video camera in an elevator in like some hotel or casino.
It was awful.
Hitting his wife or something like that. Something terrible. It was a horrible.
Knocked the shit out of her in the elevator.
He did.
Yeah.
It was terrible. It was terrible. But then a few weeks later, there was a story we saw in our like local news about how the school we all went to, New Rochelle High School, they decided to basically take down all of his like accolades, the championships he won at New Rochelle, his jersey, whatever, and basically sort of wipe the record clean as if he never existed and never went to New Rochelle High School. And Cora and I were talking about it, and I think my issue with it is like that's just factually wrong. He still did those things, and I don't like this thing that we do where we essentialize people, where it's like you're either all good or you're all bad. No, Michael Jackson was a phenomenal artist, but he was also a pedophile. The pedophilia is bad, but the music is good. Like Chris Brown is a terrible person. All the things that he's done, we could just stop the conversation by saying Rihanna, but he's had like 17 other legal issues and violence problems or whatever. And I'll agree with every criticism anybody would make of that. But his songs are still good. And like I have to say, I don't even feel bad a little bit listening to it, because I don't feel like I know who I am, I know what I'm thinking, and I know that I'm not signing on to those things. I just like the song.
Yeah, I mean, I find that math is not, for me, that math is not mathing. That you are okaying the terrible behavior, in that like I can put that aside and just consume your music. Now, the problem with saying Chris Brown is the greatest R&B artist of all time,
that's just facts,
has nothing to do with whatever happened with Rihanna. Has nothing to do with Chris Brown. Has everything to do with what he's done in the studio. And there's
he's so good.
I don't think there's a real. I mean, Aretha Franklin makes R&B. Stevie Wonder makes R&B. I mean, like, Chris Brown not even top 10 in his generation.
Oh,
like, what are you
that's
talking
glad.
about?
Oh, you said not even in his generation?
Oh my God, are you kidding?
Oh,
No.
come on, man. So who could be in his own generation? I mean, arguably Usher. You could make a good argument for Usher. But outside Usher, who else in his generation is holding a candle to him?
Well, oh my God, I can't with you. Okay, so now I have
Who are
to
you going to say, like Miguel or somebody like that? Like, who are we talking about here?
Google. Well, I mean, let's see. I mean, definitely. I mean, Maxwell's in his generation. You're gonna make
Maxwell had like 3 songs, bro. Chris Brown had 7,000.
Maxwell had 3 gigantic albums.
The glasses are coming out.
Listen,
serious.
Chris Brown wakes up on a random Tuesday and shits out a banger. Like, I don't want to eat Maxwell. Where's Maxwell right now? What's he doing?
Maxwell is so big, he takes 10 years between albums. And D'Angelo also.
You want to talk about it like D'Angelo had that one song where he was naked as fuck, where every woman was like, "Oh my God, look at his 6-pack." That's what D'Angelo's known for.
It wasn't really the 6-pack. It was like the whatever the side things.
The dick lines, the pelvic bones.
I'm not sure, but no, D'Angelo is one of the great artists of all time. I mean, there's an incredible musician.
If I ask your average R&B enjoyer, name 3 D'Angelo songs, I don't think they name them. They could definitely name 3 Chris Brown songs.
Well, I don't think that's a really good test. But I mean, like, no, I think people would. I mean, like, D'Angelo between Untitled and Brown Sugar, just destroyed the culture on multiple occasions. I mean, I'm having trouble. What Chris Brown is he 90s or is he double O's? He's really in the double O's.
He's more, yeah, he's definitely the 2000s. He's definitely the 2000s. Run It came out, I want to say, in like 2000, what was it, 6? No, it had to be lower than that. 2002?
And he was like, what, 16?
He was 16 and he's my age. So do the math on that. 88, 98, 99, 2000.
Well, I mean, okay, so
2004-ish?
So 2000s, I mean, come on, bro. Neo is in the 2000s.
Neo's great. I love Neo. I give him, he's like a top 10, certainly for his
Beyonce
generation.
makes
Usher, I
R&B.
think, is close to Chris Brown, but he just...
Beyonce makes R&B.
Do I have to give my other controversial opinion?
Like,
Don't bring up Beyonce.
Ultimate controversial
Oh,
opinion.
I'm not a fan. I'm just not a fan, man.
Krystal,
Give me
we are
Rihanna
so
all day
offline
over Beyonce.
immediately. What is happening right now?
Rihanna all day over Beyonce. I know this is probably my most controversial.
This is the hottest of takes.
Because you know what? It's also like
I'm sweating at
everybody,
this.
but like,
At this
here's the thing:
musically,
everybody sucks her off 24/7, and it's like, it's
why
not
do you,
like
why
they're
do you,
overstating it.
wow.
Everybody's like, "Oh my God, yes, Queen, do your one show every 3 years."
How often do you think these people should perform?
I mean, like I said, Chris Brown on a random Tuesday shits out a new banger, so like, just keep pumping out music.
I mean, but this is not a quantity game. It takes. It
I
probably
agree.
takes-
It's
it
quality
probably
and
takes
quantity.
It probably takes Beyonce a year to make an album, probably, right? And she could go on tour for a year, right? Because like you wouldn't necessarily know. Like you hear a lot about an artist when they're touring in America, right? When they go to tour in Europe and Asia, the press calms down because they're doing press over there. So there are a lot of times people will be like, what happened to so-and-so? They're on their European tour. That's what happened to them. I remember somebody once, because I happened to be friends with a friend of the ex-wife of one of the Chili Peppers. And it was like, we hadn't heard from them in a minute. Where are they? Dude, they just did 20 dates in South America, and each of them walked away with millions of dollars. Each of them. And there's like 5 of them. But that's just a general notion. Okay, but the quantity does not prove anything, right?
Well, I
John
agree, but it's a
Legend-
mix of
John
quantity
Legend
and quality. You need both.
John Legend is also in the double O's. Mariah
Chris
Carey
Brown blows him
also-
out of the water. Mariah Carey's great.
Carey's-
Mariah Carey's
He
great.
loves Mariah Carey.
But I love Mariah Carey, but I almost want to make.
Okay, I'm going to stop you because no, Chris Brown is not better than John Legend.
Yes, he is. He absolutely is.
Usher, as we've already mentioned, Alicia Keys.
Usher's a close number 2 to Chris, for sure.
Okay, that's ridiculous.
Listen,
That's just ridiculous. It doesn't
Hold
even
on.
make any sense. I'm the eldest boy. That doesn't make any sense.
listen.
Whenever I say that doesn't make any sense now, I want to immediately go, I am the eldest boy. Even though it doesn't
I'm not. Let me just to explain to
Leo
everybody.
was in the double O's.
I'm not an album listener. Like, I don't listen to full album. You don't listen to full albums either, right? I'm like a casual music enjoyer. And with Chris, literally since he came out until this day, he's released so many albums. Every single album, I could just listen to the whole thing and never hit skip. That's how good his songs are.
As much as it pains me to say this, Justin Timberlake made R&B.
Justin Timberlake is good, but he's not better than Chris.
Chris doesn't have anything that touches sexy back.
Okay, don't make me read all my Chris Brown songs on my.
Amy Winehouse made R&B.
She was so
Good.
like she had
Good.
one
Good.
album, right?
Don't say-
Did she have one
what?
album? I can't even
I have
name
no
more than
idea.
one of her songs. Like "Try to Make Me Go to Rehab." That's all I know of hers.
Well, I mean, look, your lack of study of the genre is not my problem. Like all these people
Listen.
are way better than Chris Brown.
Totally disagree. All I know is what's in my iPhone library, and it's like I have so many Chris Brown songs and very few other people. Like I just like R&B in general, so I have a lot of like genuine songs in there. There's certain artists who I'm more attracted to, and I admit my list is subjective, but you're not allowed to say it now about Chris because it's blasphemy because of how terrible he is in his personal life. But musically, there's a reason why he's got a community that stands super hard because his music is still phenomenal.
Can we agree to disagree on this one, boys?
I'm willing to do that, but I don't think he's going to let this go.
Go ahead if you want to ask a different
Well, I
question.
wanted to ask. Okay, so I have 2 more questions I want to ask you, Touré. So another hot topic. I'm probably going to take the kids to see Little Mermaid. Obviously, it became very controversial because people were in their feelings about the mermaid main character being a black woman. I know you went and saw it. What'd you think of it from an artistic perspective?
Well, not only is the Little Mermaid black, but so is the Queen.
Ursula or who?
No, Ursula's the sea witch.
The evil.
Right.
The prince
The queen.
who the Little Mermaid must kiss,
Yeah.
his mother is black because the
Oh,
prince was
okay.
adopted long ago.
Oh, okay.
So that's a whole. That's gonna. If it bothers you that the Little Mermaid is black, wait till you see the Queen. um, I mean, I didn't love the Little Mermaid. Didn't love that the whole thing of he's got to kiss this silent, pretty girl. Totally. Immediately, first I was like, how is she going to consent if she can't talk?
I said that about Sleeping Beauty the other day,
Yeah,
remember?
we were
Oh,
talking about
100%.
Like, bro,
100%.
it's so
Sleeping
rapey.
Beauty, that's assault. But
Yeah.
also, it totally brought up the thing of like what men would love is a beautiful girl who doesn't talk. Right? She doesn't nag. She doesn't complain. She doesn't say she doesn't want to go to the restaurant I want to go to. She doesn't say no. She doesn't talk at all. This is great. She's beautiful and she's not bothering me. This is fantastic. And I'm like, and that's like a perverse male thing of like men, we don't really see women as full people. Like, there's a certain value to them. So if they don't talk, that would be great, right? I could just hang with the boys and she doesn't talk and drink. And I'm like, really? This is what we're doing?
it's like
the
Andrew Tate's ideal woman. It's like,
Oh my God! Oh, Andy Tate would love her except that she's black. But he would love. She doesn't talk. She's great. So that kind of threw me off on the whole thing. I mean, I don't know. It's okay. It was fine for the kids, I guess. My daughter was like 10 out of 10, and my wife said something interesting too because you come in and there's Zeus, I guess. What's his name? The king of the sea? What's his name?
Poseidon.
Poseidon. Thank you,
Yeah.
Poseidon. And his seven, I believe it was, seven gorgeous daughters. And they're
Mhm.
clearly this Benetton group of women. Here's the African one, here's the Asian one, here's the Mexican one, here's the right. They look complete and like great, great. But they're also like all super skinny and like curvy, like size
Mhm.
2 or 0 or
So it was
whatever.
only a certain type of diversity.
It's only a certain kind of. My wife's like, "Where's the body positivity? Where's the fat one? If not the medium-sized one?" And I'm like, "Wow!" Like, I want like that's a level of diversity that you wonder like could we actually get to that as a society? Like
Hmm.
it's one like we're kicking and screaming about racial and ethnic diversity. But then it was like could you imagine a movie where the love interest is, a woman who's 200 pounds? Like could that happen? And the man is, like fit, but she's overweight, but he's still like, could that happen? Could you see that happening?
I think eventually that'll happen. I'm thinking of that. What's that movie with the two black lovers who are in the closet? Moonlight or something like that?
Moonlight. Uh huh.
That was a great movie. And I remember thinking at the time, like, oh, this is like sort of like edgy in a sense because it was like a new. It's almost sort of like Brokeback Mountain 2,
Yeah.
except now it's two black actors, and it was a
It was
phenomenal
totally.
movie.
It
And I
was
think
totally.
eventually they'll find a way to do what you're talking about in a way like that sort of does it in a non-pushy kind of way where it doesn't feel like you're just saying we're doing this just to do it, where it fits into the story well. You know what I mean?
Those guys in Moonlight, they were all physically beautiful, right? In the
Oh no,
last,
no, you're right. I'm just saying that we got to the point where it's like diverse plus gay, and then at some
yeah.
point it'll be like they'll have a trans lead, the actor or actress or whatever playing the role, and then there'll be an overweight one at some point. Like it'll happen. It just you need the right story and the right storyteller, and then I
I mean,
definitely think they'll greenlight it.
I wonder if it would. I don't. I wonder how, if it would have looked, how it would look to the audience, of like skinny Asian, skinny African, skinny Mexican, and then this one's bigger. And would the audience register they're all the same? Or would we have that, like that, like you don't even say anything, but everyone goes, mm. You know what I mean?
Of course, I mean there were 1,000 right-wing YouTubers going after the Little Mermaid for having a black mermaid.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
every little thing is gonna lead to that fact. I mean,
Scrutinized.
everything
Yeah.
that look at everything that happened with Bud Light, just for having like a trans person basically advertise it for them. there was this colossal backlash from the right. And this stuff, it comes in waves. It dies down, and then they'll find the next target, which is literally Target in this case.
At the moment.
Yeah. But they'll just keep, they keep picking their targets. But it's not going to stop because for these corporations, there is more money on the side of diversity because that ship has sailed now. Everybody in casual society, polite society, normie society acknowledges, it's a good thing. And so they're never going to, it doesn't matter how loud they get. I think they know it's still, 10% of the population is that loud minority screaming, we don't want this.
Yeah. If it's even that.
Yeah.
If it's even that. My last question for you, Touré, is I know you're working on another series with music in the 70s. Just wanted to, ask you, give us a little bit of the highlights on that and timeline for that project.
Hopefully in the next few months. It's getting there. I think it's about 75% done. Just wanted to apply the same lens to some of the great songs of the 70s. There's an episode that I'm working on about Afrofuturism, which is a whole band of art that portrays Black people in the future, and generally in a context of being free. So we are sort of imagining being more powerful, more free in the future. So it's super... when you see it, like Black Panther is the most popular example of it in popular culture. But there's several examples of it. And there's a Parliament Funkadelic song that I can dive into as representative of a notion of we are leaving for another, because Parliament Funkadelic would have a spaceship called the Mothership land on the stage during the show.
Oh my God.
And this was understood as, we are really from somewhere else, and we are now returning to that place to be free, right? And the mothership, the motherland, all that stuff. And it's built on... That song is built on elements of an old gospel song, coming for to carry me home. So that song was more like, either we're going to Canada or we're going to heaven, but we're leaving here to be free. And the P-Funk song plays on those same notes, right? We're leaving this planet and we're going to where we can be free.
Hold on a second, Touré. I just need to see who's at the door.
Yeah, sure.
Still there?
I don't know.
I thought it was just a package or something. I'm looking forward to your series on Chris Brown.
Where are you guys right now?
We are in King George at our home in Virginia.
Okay, great.
Yeah. They're getting their studio redone. Krystal and Sagar are.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's why we're not in the studio at the moment.
Okay. That's fine.
Is it just a package, babe?
I haven't seen anybody. I see nothing.
Was it somebody for...
I have no idea. Anyway.
You want to go look or no?
No, it's okay.
There's no car there either?
No car. No nothing.
It was a ghost. It was a ghost that rang our doorbell. All right.
Oof.
I know, it's not good.
I get that looked at. God.
Yeah.
Lungs coming out next. What else? We were talking about the 70s. There's a song that Parliament Funkadelic does that speaks to DC, Chocolate City, that I love. And that episode talks about the life of cities and how we came to live in these cities to, the Great Migration. Mm-hmm. But also devolves into that a lot of people who care deeply about DC think Marion Barry was the greatest mayor they ever had, which is an interesting part of the conversation we were having about separating the art from the artist. Because a lot of people outside of DC just think of him as the mayor who got caught doing crack.
Right.
But people, like political science people who study DC, understand, he understood. One of his political opponents once said he understood politics better high and drunk than I did sober.
A lot of
Listen.
people loved him in the
And
city.
you're gonna get a lot done if
Was
you're high
like
on crack.
he was a real sort of like populist champion.
You're gonna get a lot done if you're high on crack. It's like
He
Adderall.
got a lot done. He took care of the city. He got a lot of people jobs. That's why they reelected him after he got caught doing crack, because he was a great mayor who understood how to work the system and make it produce for people.
Congrats on the series. I think it's fantastic. I told you before, I'm very excited for you about the project because I think it melds together some of your greatest strengths, and you can tell listening to you, like the passion and the insight in each episode. So super excited. Tell people where they can find you, follow you, and especially listen to the podcast.
Being Black the 80s is available wherever you get your podcasts, and I'm on Instagram and TikTok at Touré Show. I've been starting to post more and more on TikTok. It's fun.
Oh, okay.
It's huge. It's gigantic.
It's a much nicer community than Twitter has become.
Oh,
Twitter
is a cesspool.
Yeah.
And Krystal says Instagram is nice too. Our kitty's here.
Our kitty showed up
Krystal
for
says
the
Instagram is nice too, which I
What's
wouldn't
your
know.
kitty's name?
Salem. Classic
Nice.
black cat name.
Nice. There you go. I don't know where Marley is, but maybe he's sleeping. Oh, he's sleeping.
You just lick my nose. All right, my friend. Love chatting with you. We'll talk
Love you
again soon.
guys.
Thank you so much, Touré.
All right, so that was Touré. I was born in 1988. I'm a kid of the 90s.
Yeah.
And, I feel like most of my life, music was kind of non-political to the extent anything is non-political. I mean, everything's political. But
Right.
it's like relatively non-political compared to like overt political tones.
Yeah.
So I've noticed my bias is that if stuff is too political and they pour it on too heavy,
Yeah.
I find it very cringe. If you're going to have a political message in a song, I feel like it has to be subtle, has to be nuanced, it has to be like maybe double meanings, so you leave it on people to figure out what's going on. But I don't know if that's just me from my generation, or if that's everybody sort of feels that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think everybody feels that way because some of the like sort of overtly political girl boss type music is popular, like Lizzo type of stuff, or that Meghan
I can
Trainor
get down with some
or
Lizzo,
whatever.
though. I can get down with some Lizzo. Meghan Trainor, no.
Yeah.
Not happening, no.
Anyway, so, I mean, I do think, Beyonce has tried to be political with some of her... But I think what perhaps you're reacting to is one of the points we were touching on, which is that any political music that would make it out today would be like corporate approved political music. And so it wouldn't have a radicalism or an edginess or a controversial element that might land more. I also think, we're living in a very cynical age where everybody thinks everything that is earnest is cringe. So even like back in the Obama era, there was like will.i.am people were doing like these earnest, hopeful Obama inspired type of music that, there were even some like remember there were like Obama songs that people listened to unironic. And now it's like, oh my God, that's so cringe. But at the time people didn't feel like it was cringe. Now it's just, there's such a level of cynicism based on the experiences that we've had as a nation between then and now of having any like hopefulness sort of like crushed out of us in the recession and the continuing of the wars and all of that stuff that, I don't know, I think that bleeds into the way that we read political messages as well, where we don't take them as earnest or at face value. It's like, all right, this is virtue signaling, it's a ploy, it's not real, it's fake, and therefore it's cringe.
I think there's a point in all of that, but for me personally, I think I always just come back to, do I like the beat? Do I like the rhythm? Do I like the sound?
Yeah.
You could be singing about getting your asshole sucked, but if you're freaking it and it's a good beat, I'm like, yo, that's my song right there. So I think it always comes back to that. Like, can I just give you an example real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, so we were at our daughter's rehearsal yesterday.
Yes.
And one of the songs
Dance
that one of the
rehearsal.
kids was dancing to
Yeah.
was that old Pokemon theme song.
Yeah.
They're singing about Pokemon. It's the cringiest thing you ever heard. But I was like, yo, this is my song. Remember this shit? Pokemon. Like, I was, gotta catch 'em all. I'm like, yo, let this rock.
That is very much filtered through your childhood.
Of course.
nostalgia.
No, absolutely,
'Cause
absolutely.
It's not actually a good song.
No, but I fuck with the beat. The beat is nice. The beat is nice. You go back and listen to some of my, my favorite
So
rap
funny.
songs are like Big Timers, Cash Money Millionaires. And like the lyrics in oh my god.
Yeah.
But like you listen to it and you're like, oh yeah, they're nailing this.
Yeah.
So it's more
absolutely.
about, so in other words, I feel like it almost doesn't matter what the content is for a casual music listener like myself.
You don't respond as much to the lyrics and the content
don't.
as the feel and the beat. I mean, I think I'm probably the same way.
But I'm a bias of my generation too, is the point that I'm making. That perhaps for people from the 60s or 70s where there was more potency and
Yeah, well, and also we
music.
are casual
correct.
pop music consumers, like popular culture music consumers. And Touré is viewing it through a
Right.
different lens than we are.
Yeah.
Like he's like actually studied this and is like deep in the genre and thinks about the artistry of it. Like he's consuming it at a different level perhaps than we are. So that may also impact the way that he interprets these things. But yeah, it reminds me of the conversation we have about like political comedy, which is same thing. If it's funny, then it's great.
Right.
And if it becomes more about the politics than about the comedy,
Like Bill Maher. Yeah.
then it's cringe.
Yeah.
And it's
That's
kind of
too
the same
preachy.
thing for the music. Like if
Yeah.
it was political music that had a great beat and like just it was irresistibly catchy and whatever, then you wouldn't find it cringe. You wouldn't have a problem
the
with
Tupac
it.
songs.
But it's
There's
when
some Tupac songs like that.
But when it's like, I'm going to make a female empowerment song and it becomes more about that
Right.
than about making a good song,
Mm-hmm.
that's when you act like, nah, missed.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think we're part of our own generation on that. If we were to talk to like Marianne Williamson, I'm sure she would have a take of like, no, for a song to be good or for music to be good, it has to mix in elements of like the rhythm and the beat or whatever with a good message that's delivered well. Whereas me, I'm like, I'm going to go listen to Big Timers where they're rapping about my tank is still on E, but
Well,
I'm hood rich.
This is like the difference between the original Woodstock and Woodstock 99.
Right. But Woodstock 99, okay, but they crossed the line way over into just debauchery.
Yes.
Almost like debauchery for debauchery's sake.
Right.
I'm anti-debauchery, but I'm pro-music that's all over the map in terms of the message as long as it sounds good.
You're anti-debauchery? I didn't know that about you.
I am anti-debauchery. I think raping and pillaging is bad. I will take a moral stand.
But the core of my point is, the original Woodstock, there was like a political core and like a community that was coming in. The music was meaningful to them in that cultural context.
They
It
had
was
some
overtly political too. Whereas Woodstock 99,
Was like
all of the politics of it is stripped down. It was just like,
Frat
let's
bros.
go rage and have a party.
Exactly.
Yeah, so anyway, those are our thoughts.
All right, guys. That's the show. We love y'all very much. Thank you, as always, for listening. You know the shameless plugs. Everybody go on over to Substack, and if you pay $5 a month, you get the video of every show, and you get it a day early. You also get our newsletters, etc. And much love to everybody who already supports us over on Substack. We love you guys, and we'll talk to you next week.